Hello, everyone, and Happy New Year! Woohoo! My name is Tyler Greenlee,
I'm Bo Weldon.
and welcome to Wildlife Wednesday. This month, that we're going to be covering some of the best videos from last year, which I'm super excited to reshare with you all. We've got some exciting stuff, and to start out, we're going to be talking about wolves and bison with some very great video footage from Yellowstone with Sarah Ernst. July through September is the time bison gather in the green valleys to court and breed. It's the time for the annual bison rut. During this time, bull bison court females by tending them and roaring. Tending is when bull bison guard one individual female at a time, versus a heron is when a male guards many different females, which is seen in elk but is not often seen in bison. This is also the time of year when bison are most aggressive and where it can be most dangerous to approach bison. Bison also during this time exhibit other behaviors besides tending and roaring. They also roll in the dust. And all of this often culminates with male bison fighting for females. And these fights can have benefits for other animals within the ecosystem. For example, bison that have fallen during these fights, have succumbed to their injuries, been killed by other bison, provide food for a lot of scavengers, including turkey vultures, eagles, coyotes, and wolves. Bison that have died during these fights can actually provide wolf packs with an incredible source of protein during this time of year. So much so that certain wolf packs within Yellowstone National Park almost only feed on dead bison this time of year. And this is really important because a lot of prey at this time of year is incredibly difficult for wolves to catch. Prey species like elk and deer and healthy bison this time of year are healthier than at any other time. And so they become incredibly difficult for wolves to catch. And so wolves become more and more reliant over time on these bison carcasses. And from the months of July, August, September, and October, these carcasses provide a great food source for these wolves. And even into early winter, November and December, bison that later on die from their injuries will feed wolves as they prepare to hunt animals that have been weakened by the winter. In areas where bison don't exist, like Voyageurs National Park in Minnesota, wolves are much more vulnerable this time of year to starvation, and this is reflected in the survival rate of their puppies. Fortunately, in Yellowstone, because there's bison, wolf packs like the Junction Butte pack end up enjoying higher pup survival rates, and this leads to much larger packs forming in Yellowstone National Park as compared to areas where there aren't bison or the bison numbers are too low to supply wolves with a regular food source this time of year. Because we have information and data comparing wolf bison interactions in Yellowstone compared to areas where there aren't bison living with wolves, we can predict what it was like on the Great Plains before all the bison were killed off. It's likely that on the Great Plains of North America, when there were 60 million bison roaming, those bison provided a really great food source for wolf packs out on the Great Plains. And there are incredible historical accounts of these massive wolf packs the size of the Junction Butte pack, roaming the Great Plains, following the bison herds, and scavenging from the bison that died from their injuries. Thank you, Sarah, so much for providing that wolf hunting imagery. I mean,
So cool.
I always see that footage and I think to myself what it must have been like on the Great Plains when there were millions of bison roaming and huge wolf packs hunting them. And so thank you so much, Sarah, for providing that footage. Yeah. So up next, we have a really, really cool video, and we're going to actually talk over it to kind of explain what's going on. This spring, kind of in April, one of our guides, Mark, found a dead mountain lion along the banks of the Snake River. And we're going to show you it here in a second. I'm going to click the video for you guys. So this mountain lion was found kind of in an area south of town along the banks of the Snake River. And Mark and his wife were just skiing and happened to cross it. It's a pretty incredible sighting.
Yeah, and this was, on his own time, not with guests, but also just goes to show how much the guys, we still get out on our own time. But I know Mark reported it took him a long time to get this close. He was definitely like, I'm going to wait until I can confirm that cat is not alive and I'm not going to disturb it.
Exactly. And it just kind of shows you what cool things you can find when you go snowshoeing or cross-country skiing out in the woods. And of course, it is winter, and so we are giving our snowshoe and cross-country ski tours at this time, which is super exciting. As far as we know, that cougar died from a disease called avian influenza, which is becoming more and more of a prevalent disease, not just in domestic livestock like chickens and ducks, but also in wild animals.
Yep.
And that cougar died, we believe, from eating a Canada goose. What happened was after Mark found that animal, he did report it to Wyoming Game and Fish, and they sent in samples and they tested positive for avian influenza, and then they searched the stomach contents too and found evidence of a Canada goose.
Yeah. So there was kind of a, then Game and Fish will release, here for the follow-up of like, hey, dog owners or people in this area, just be aware, because that is in our area now.
Yeah, you have to be super careful with your domestic animals like dogs and stuff when hiking in wetlands where there is waterfowl, especially since avian influenza is becoming much more frequent in the environment. Awesome. So up next, we have another great video by Laura and Kirk, who are some of our more senior guides. This is a video that I've really enjoyed. I found it very educational.
Yeah.
It's on the Old Faithful Inn, which is one of our most visited destinations in Yellowstone during the summer.
Hey, this is Laura. Welcome to the beautiful and historic Old Faithful Inn here up in Yellowstone National Park. The architect of the Old Faithful Inn was a young man named Robert Reamer. Reamer was originally from a small town in Ohio. Reamer left home at the very young age of 13 to start a new life in sunny San Diego, California, where he met some very important people. He met Charles Mellon, who was the president of the Northern Pacific Railroad Company, who gave Reamer the job working in Yellowstone National Park to construct the Old Faithful Inn and a new train depot up in Gardner, Montana. There has never been a railroad line that entered Yellowstone National Park, not back then and not nowadays. The Northern Pacific Railroad Company wanted to sell more train tickets and marketed the area as a wonderland, persuaded people to come see it, but that meant having infrastructure once the guests arrived. They built hotels within the national park, as well as stagecoach roads, so that guests could get off the rail and onto a stagecoach and go bumping down the dusty trail from hotel to hotel. Back then, a ticket price was just $50 and included all food, lodging, accommodations, and travel for 5.5 days. Reamer was not necessarily famous at the time for his prior work. He was only 29 years old when he first constructed the Old Faithful Inn. So I think he had some experience, but not a ton in other places at that point. But he was in the right place at the right time and willing to head out to Yellowstone, a very cold, snowy place, over the winter of 1903 into 1904, when the Old Faithful Inn first opened for business. Come up the stairs with me, down the red carpet, and through the big red doors of the inn. Back in the old days, visitors would have found the doors closed for safety and would have pulled down on a rope outside to ring the doorbell. The doorbell is on the interior of the door and made out of cast iron, which would ding and alert the guards to let the visitors in. His idea was to bring the outdoors in and built the Old Faithful Inn out of lodgepole pine. The height of a mature lodgepole pine forest is about 76 feet. So he made the top of the building, pointed top of the old house, the oldest section of the hotel, at the exact height of the lodgepole pine forest. Kind of like a big fort. And at the top of the fort is a super neat feature called the crow's nest. The crow's nest is my favorite part of the inn because it reminds me of a treehouse. You know, since Reamer was very young at the time of designing his building and perhaps missed out on part of his childhood, leaving home so early, he wanted to put a little treehouse at the top, the peak of the hotel. Reamer wanted the style of his hotel to be rustic, and noticed that when he was spending time in the forest, that nature is not perfect. So on the interior of the building, there are asymmetrical windows on the side walls of the hotel to allow light to filter in naturally. Kind of like how light filters down through the limbs of the trees in the forest. He also designed the exterior of the building to not quite match up. There are 2 dormer windows on the right side and 3 on the left side because nature's not perfect. But that was done on purpose. It might look like a mistake to some people, but I think Reamer meant to do that. He wanted to make it feel like you were inside a lodgepole pine forest, but have modern convenience of the indoors. The original hotel opened with light fixtures and indoor plumbing back in June of 1904. Which to me is quite impressive, being that the Old Faithful Inn is just so remote. Inside the Old Faithful Inn, another neat feature is the rhyolite chimney. Rhyolite was local stone brought in from a nearby quarry, which weighed about 500 tons. In 1959, there was a massive earthquake in the area with the epicenter very, very close to Old Faithful. And the top part of the rhyolite chimney, which was very heavy, spun or twisted and toppled over onto the hotel dining room. But luckily, that earthquake happened at almost midnight, so there was no one eating supper in the hotel at the time. But many things have tried to destroy the Old Faithful Inn. Of course, that earthquake in 1959 and the Great Fires of 1988. One addition to the Old Faithful Inn in 1987 were sprinklers. There was a new fire code in effect, and they installed sprinklers so that if there was a fire in the hotel or outside it, they could wet the building down. And that proved invaluable the next year, almost a year from the date they put them in 1988, when a fire spread because of high winds to the area, and they were able to just wet the building down really quickly and save it from devastation. So that was really lucky and good planning on the part of the park service. I love some of the fine details that Reamer, his carpenters, and artists have used in the construction of the inn. As you walk into the grand room, the registration desk is on your left, and designers of the hotel picked out a lodgepole pine tree for right in front of the desk with a big grizzly bear claw mark in it. The banister is made from hand-selected lodgepole pine. There are certain pine trees in the forest that have branches that have been damaged by heavy snow loads or by wind and are not quite straight. One of the carpenters, named Melvin Campbell, actually signed the inn down one hallway by guest rooms and dated his signature from back in 1903 in a carpenter's pencil. And I love the old payphones. There actually are old phone booths in the hallways of the Old Faithful Inn with actual phones inside them. I know for some of you older viewers, payphones were normal, but up in Yellowstone, they're a relic from the past. You can still use the payphones to make local calls or load coins into them to call long distance. But I just think that's a fun detail from the past. No historic hotel is complete without a good ghost story. There's a headless bride ghost that descends down out of the crow's nest searching for her decapitated head. She's wearing a flowing gown from back in the early 1900s. She's sometimes seen by visitors or staff coming down out of the crow's nest searching for her decapitated head. The young woman was from back east, where she had a marriage arranged for her by her father, but decided to break it off. There was a man that she was in love with instead that swept her off her feet. The father disagreed with this matchup, so he gave them their wedding gift of some money, but then disconnected her from the family and said that she couldn't have her inheritance. But the happy couple left the East Coast on their honeymoon for Yellowstone National Park and stayed at the inn. While they were there, the husband decided to gamble away her father's gift. The bride quickly called home to Dad and told him about it, crying. But the dad didn't listen. He was still angry. So later that night, the two got into an argument in their hotel room, and the husband killed the wife in the bathtub and took her head away. The next morning, after other guests complained about the turbulence in the hotel room, about the arguments in the hotel room, the park staff broke into the room and took a look and found the bride dead in her bathtub. Sounds pretty scary. But she's still there searching for her lost head.
Thank you, Laura, so much for sharing all that great info about the Old Faithful Inn, one of our most traveled to destinations.
It's such a cool place, and like that video shows, in these big historical places, when you poke around a little bit more and like ask the people that have been working there a long time, or ask guides that spend a lot of time in those places, there's some cool hidey holes.
Totally.
There's some cool stuff in there.
It's kind of like a scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially when you have little kids. It's a lot of fun to take them around to like the different rooms and to show them different things about those buildings and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, great. Up next, we're going to show you guys some baby animals from the springtime.
Yeah.
You know, spring seems really far away at this point, but we like to look back and see all of the little critters during the springtime. So here's Sarah Ernst with baby animals.
Hello, wildlife watchers. This is Sarah Ernst coming to you from a patch of mule's ear wildflowers, a native wildflower of these parts. When I lead a trip, often people will ask, well, what's your favorite time of year for wildlife watching? And my answer is all year round, because every time of year there is something amazing happening out there, from the wolves of the winter, bears in early spring, the elk bugling in the fall. In June, definitely the highlight for me is the baby wildlife. We can see everything from 30-pound bison babies to the tiniest little baby weasels scurrying across the landscape. We're going to talk a little bit about the wildlife that we've been seeing across Jackson Hole and Yellowstone over the last month, and show you some of our favorite scenes that we've had over the month. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the strategy each animal has when it comes to bringing your baby out into a dangerous wild world. The first hoofed animal, or ungulate, that we see giving birth in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem is the American bison. Much earlier than the rest of the hoofed animals, we see our first bison calves on the ground sometimes as late as the last week of March or so, and then through April and May and into June. About 80% of the Yellowstone bison have May birthdays. We call them red dogs for their somewhat canine-looking appearance and playful behavior. At around 2.5 months old, they start shedding their orange fur, and around 4 months old, they're solid brown. With both bison and moose calves, They will begin to travel alongside their mother within a few hours of being born. In the case of bison, they will rejoin the herd. In the case of moose, they will travel by their loner mother's side for the rest of the year and sometimes into the next year as well. Moose are one of the only big animals we see around here that will have twins on occasion. In Jackson Hole, that's about 1 out of every 20 moose will have twins. And imagine being pregnant with a moose calf with those long legs would be unpleasant enough during your last trimester with all that kicking. But being pregnant with twins and 8 little legs kicking out in different directions must be a lot for that moose mother to go through. While bison and moose are both large and aggressive enough to defend their young against predators, the smaller ungulates will prefer to hide their young the first week or two after giving birth, only coming back to nurse them a few times per day. Elk calves have a high predation rate. About 2 out of every 3 elk calves that are born are preyed upon by predators within the first year, including grizzly bears like 399, wolves, mountain lions, and even golden eagles. To help protect their young against predators, it's safest for the females to hide them until they're large and fast enough to travel with the herd. The elk calves have very little scent, and that does not travel very far as they tend to lay very low amongst the grass or sagebrush or willows. And they also have white spots that help camouflage them against the dappled background. Our smaller 2 members of the deer family, mule deer and white-tailed deer, will follow a similar strategy to the elk, having young with spots to help for camouflage and very little odor, and hiding them the first week or 2 after they're born. Many of us will sometimes encounter these fawns in our neighborhoods, as deer are pretty successful at integrating themselves with human society today. It's very important to leave fawns alone when you find them, even if it looks like they're abandoned. The female will usually not approach if you're nearby, and moving them will decrease the chance that the mother and fawn will be able to reunite. Pronghorn fawns are my very favorite to watch. Within a few days of being born, a pronghorn fawn can already outrun a human, so when they get a case of a zoomies, they can really tear it up. Pronghorn does' uteruses are bicornate, kind of meaning heart-shaped, and in a human female that can lead to reproductive problems. But in a pronghorn, it helps keep them balanced, having 1 baby in each corner, and because, like elk, they also have a fairly high predation rate on their young, it gives them a chance to have an heir and a spare, another one to carry on the genes in case one gets taken out by predators. Mountain goat kids are about the same size as pronghorn fawns when they come out, but unlike pronghorn fawns, they're able to leap around the cliffs that they're born on just a few hours of being born and stay by their mother's side, similar to the bison and the moose. Also, like bison and moose, the females are very aggressive in defending their young because they typically don't encounter many predators on the high cliffs that we see them on their whole lives. One of the only predators on mountain lion kids are eagles, which will occasionally knock a kid off of the cliffs where they're able to then go fly down and feed on it. All of these hoofed animals are born from mid to late spring, partly to take advantage of the abundance of forage at that time of year, the new grasses coming out, the new leaves coming out on the trees, but also to overwhelm the predators with availability. If all the young were staggered out over the course of the summer, the predators would be able to pick them off one by one. But if all the hoofed animals give birth at the same time, the predators can only eat so many when they're abundant. For our canine predators, they give birth a little earlier than the hoofed animals, usually around April into May for foxes, but typically before we see the green up that we get later on in the season. In the case of wolves, that's to take advantage of the weakened condition of our ungulates at the end of the winter and the beginning of the spring, and that transitions into the availability of young later in spring and into early summer. In the case of foxes, that's to take advantage of all of the rodent availability that time of year. Coyotes, being prey-wise in between foxes and wolves, take advantage of both resources. All three of our wild canine species will give birth in a den and raise their pups there the first few months of their life. The den can be dug out of the earth or in other protected places such as boulder fields. We've even seen them den under buildings in Grand Teton National Park. The den helps protect them from other predators as well as environmental factors like weather. And as the pups grow bigger, their eyes open, their fur comes out, and they begin to travel further and further away from their den in exploration. Wolves will eventually move their young to a rendezvous site at the end of summer, beginning of fall, when they're able to travel. Contrary to popular belief, most canines do not spend the night in dens. We see wolves lying around a den site while the pups are inside guarding it, but prefer to sleep out in the open themselves. One of the biggest threats to wolf pups are other wolves, so by laying outside the den when they sleep, they can keep an eye out for danger. Meanwhile, way back in midwinter when the wild canines are breeding, the bears, both the grizzly bears and the black bears, are already giving birth deep within their dens underneath the snow. The young are just a pound or so when they're born, without fur, and their eyes and ears are sealed shut. They will nurse on the females for 2 months in the den before they come out in the springtime. Black bear cubs will travel with their mother for the next year, nursing and also being taught how to find food across the ecosystem. This fall, they'll go into the den with her and hibernate, nursing, but also taking advantage of her body heat. They're a little too small to survive the winter on their own most times. As yearlings, the female will wean them and chase them away so that she can mate again. Black bear cubs are pretty small when they leave their mother, and when we encounter them this time of year, I'll often hear people say that their mother must be around. But it's not uncommon for us to find these small black bears just making a go of it by themselves. Still, though, we want to be respectful of the 100-yard distance from young black bear cubs, even though mother might not be around. Grizzly cubs will stay with their mother much longer, usually 2.5 years, sometimes 3.5 years. The average grizzly only gives birth every 3 years, so they have a much slower reproductive system than most of the other mammals across the ecosystem. Despite all those years of mother teaching them how to find food, it's often these young grizzly bears that get into trouble with people living in neighborhoods or agricultural areas around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So if you live around this area and there's a potential of a grizzly coming into your neighborhood, it's very important to keep tempting items like bird seed, dog food, or trash well out of reach of a young, curious grizzly bear.
Oh man, Sarah, thanks so much for all that info on those little animals. Well, it's cold here. It was negative 8-10 degrees this morning getting out there for a ski tour today. But I always do think about those little ones. And while either they're in dens with mama bears or they're in bellies of mama elk right now, it's always fun to keep that thought that like the spring will come. And those little ones will have their time, their re-entry to the world or their first time, which is really, really cool. But while we are still in our winter months and our cold temps, thinking about those little bears that are in there, we're going to jump over to Laura, who has a great video explaining how bears have unbelievable tricks up their sleeve, both in terms of like pregnancy and what they do all winter long, muscle mass all winter, really cool stuff. Let's jump over to Laura and learn about all these tricks of hibernating bears.
Hi everyone, this is Laura. This time of the year, in the middle of the winter, we all want to imagine our local bears snuggled into their dens, all happy, safe, and warm until spring. In the spring, when they come out of their torpid state, they're going to be just as strong as when they went into their den in the fall or early winter. Although they've lost some fat reserves over the winter, they do not lose any of their muscle mass. And to me, that's quite amazing. Bears are able to recycle proteins within their body and also waste products in their body which are processed during their torpid state. Let me explain. To me, wild animals have evolved with traits that make them able to perform like superheroes. For bears, their superhero trait is that they're able to sleep or go into a state of torpor or light hibernation for months at a time. And when they get out of bed, they're just as strong as when they went into their den in the fall. For humans, if we could adapt that behavior or adapt the ability to recycle nutrients within our body, we might be able to go to a different planet. We might be able to travel to Mars. We might be able to stay in a coma for a long amount of time. We might even be able to fix ailments like kidney diseases that afflict many people. When our bodies, or the bear's body, is functioning normally, we create a waste product called urea. Urea is created in the liver when we break down proteins or amino acids, and then it's transferred into the bloodstream where the kidneys will filter out that urea into the bladder, and then we pee it out. But sometimes, like in the case of a bear that's in hibernation, they're not excreting anything. They're not going to the bathroom throughout the winter. Also, if a human has a problem with his or her kidney, then that could mean excess waste products or excess urea and nitrogen could build up in the bloodstream, which will make you pretty sick. So bears have developed this system to be able to recycle urea within their body and turn it into useful material, including protein, to reuse it during hibernation. This gets kind of complicated, but please bear with me. This is pretty interesting. When bears are in their dens, we assume that they're just sleeping, but in reality, their bodies are performing complex conversions to convert waste products into proteins that they can use. And don't worry, at the end of all of this, it will result in bear farts. So, of course, we're starting out with that urea stuff. It's produced by the liver, which goes into the bloodstream. Normally, the urea would then pass into the kidneys, which filters out the urea into the urine, and then that's what makes the yellow snow. But in this case, a bear's not going to the bathroom because he's in his den. So the urea passes into the saliva instead. And then that saliva is swallowed by a sleeping bear, which enters the intestines, which house special bacteria. And the bacteria help to break the urea down into bicarbonate and ammonia. Ammonia gets transferred into protein. And the bicarbonate, which is more like a waste product, gets broken down by acid created by the bacteria, which is then separated into carbon dioxide and water. Water helps to keep the bear from getting dehydrated, gets reabsorbed into the bear's system, whereas the carbon dioxide gets farted out as bear flatulence in the den. I'm assuming that bear dens are very stinky places. So we can add this metabolic conversion to the superhero traits that bears possess. Other cool things that they can do are climb trees. They can dig their own dens. A bear can do about 50 yards in 3 seconds. They mate in the springtime and then give birth to their cubs in February. And if you scroll back, check out some of our other episodes, I'll explain that too. But thank you for watching. If you have a superhero trait that you'd like me to know about, please mention it in the comments. And I'll see you next time.
Thank you, Laura, so much for all that great information about bear hibernation. And thank you so much for drawing that diagram. It was pretty great to follow along as she explained what exactly happens during bear hibernation. Really exciting. Up next, we have our boss, our leader, Taylor Phillips, talking about our sister organization, which is Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow, which is a nonprofit organization that gives money back towards wildlife. Of course, we are individually as guides and then also as a company benefiting from the wildlife that's out there every single day. And so we want to make sure that we're giving back. And so this next video is a little bit about Taylor and a little bit about Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow.
Hello everyone, my name is Taylor Phillips and I'm the owner of Jackson Hole Eco Tour Adventures. I started this incredible company in 2008 and we are here to explore Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks with you, your family, your loved ones, to make memories that you'll never forget. Our goal is to connect you to this amazing world, the national parks, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. We understand that you may only be here once, so it's our job to get your experience right the first time. In 2008, I started Eco Tour Adventures, and for the first few years, it was just myself, guiding trips, taking reservations. Now, I'm incredibly fortunate to have a very passionate, invested team that takes reservations, to spend that time, that quality, important time with you in the national parks. And with this incredible team, it's allowed me to spend some of my other time working on wildlife conservation issues that I feel passionate about. We're connecting businesses with conservation projects and putting dollars on the ground to support conservation projects. Once you finish exploring with us, you'll have a newfound appreciation for Western Wyoming and Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. Let us do the driving. Let us explore these national parks with you, your family, your friends, your loved ones. Let us transform your national park experience to an experience you will never forget. Book your tour today.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for talking with us about Wildlife Tourism for Tomorrow. I don't know about you, Bo, but I get just like a little emotional when I see that video. Because we, as guides, all love the wildlife that we show people out there. And of course, we want to conserve wildlife and make sure that we have animals to continue showing them, or to show you guys them when we're giving tours. And we're guides because we're passionate about wildlife. And so we want what's best for the animals out there. All right, everyone. So we're going to move into some of our favorite sections of the broadcast. And we're going to show you guys trivia questions from September. And then we have this month's trivia question. But if you guys are tuning in, thank you so much for joining us. That is it for our videos. But we're going to answer some questions now. And we're going to have some trivia questions, which is pretty exciting. So how this works is I have a iPad down here, and you guys might have noticed that we've been looking down every now and then, and that's because we're running the broadcast from this iPad that I have here in my hands. And so I'm going to be using this to show you guys the trivia questions and also to show you our sponsored items for this month. All right, so to start, we have this month's sponsored items, which are our optics. We have a pretty cool setup with the company Swarovski. You might be familiar with Swarovski from the Crystal Company, but they also have a sister company called Swarovski Optics, and we do use them on tour. And so that kind of gives you guys an idea of the types of binoculars and equipment that we take out with us when we're showing people wildlife. And that last binocular is a set of binoculars that we used to have. We used to partner with Maven, but we still have those binoculars up on the web store for you guys all to purchase. And so if you guys are looking for a new set of optics, feel free to check those out on the web store. And then of course, everything on the web store does go back to our guides, which is pretty awesome. And we do have a pretty extensive web store up online. And we also have a donation page. And so if you're wanting to support any of the guides, Laura, Sarah, or any of the guides that have provided video for this broadcast, feel free to go and check out that page. All right, so enough of the sponsorships and everything. Let's move on to our trivia questions. And so, if you guys remember, way back in September during our last broadcast, we asked you guys a question about bears. And so here's the question. How many calories does a bear need to eat a day for hibernation? And we got a lot of great answers. And I'm pleased to say that B is the correct answer. And so if you answered B, thank you so much for participating and congratulations on getting that right.
Nice work.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to move on to our next trivia question. And if you guys are a little confused about how trivia works, we ask a question every month during our broadcast. And we have you guys answer in the comments below. Now, if you're watching this from maybe a secondary site, you do have to go to the Eco Tour Adventures homepage in order to answer this question. If you do answer it correctly, then you get a chance for a drawing with a free web store item, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And we do this every month. And so feel free to give us your best answers, put it in the comments below on our page so that you get a chance to enter for that drawing. All right, so this month's trivia is actually brought to you by Bo.
Yep. So this month, the question is, how low did the Teton bison population get? And there's 4 different answers there for you to choose from. So sometimes folks come out here and they say, I didn't even know that Tetons had bison. But we do. We have bison down here, but kind of a unique history for them. So this month, how low did the Teton bison population get? That's our question this month.
Yeah, and if you guys are a little confused about that question, let me provide some context. So bison did disappear in the Tetons.
Yes.
And they were extirpated, over 100 years ago, along with most of the bison in the United States. And so we're not asking about that time period. We're asking about when bison were brought back to Grand Teton National Park. And to give you guys a little bit of history, around 20 bison were brought down from Yellowstone National Park. And so that should give you guys kind of a baseline for your guess. And the bison population in the Tetons has fluctuated quite a bit. Currently, we have around 500 bison within the national park that we get to see quite frequently.
I might even say 502.
Yeah.
Because I have seen 2 little red dogs, or like we saw in Sarah's video, the young animals. 2 of them out recently on tour. It's a tough time of year to be born in western Wyoming. It's quite cold outside, but we've seen them survive before, so we're rooting for them.
Yeah, bison are incredibly tough.
So tough.
Way tougher than some other young animals like elk. Like if a baby elk was born this time of year, it probably wouldn't stand a chance.
It probably wouldn't make it.
But bison are like a true Ice Age animal. They're like built for the cold, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, everyone. Feel free to throw your answers down in the comments below.
Yep.
Right now, we're going to move on to our favorite section of our broadcast, which is our question and answer. And so during this broadcast, you guys can ask us anything that's wildlife, Jackson related. That could be historic, geologic, biology about the wildlife we see out here. And we, of course, encourage questions from all ages. And so if you guys happen to have a kid or maybe a grandkid watching this broadcast with you, feel free to have them ask us some questions.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And so once again, I'll show you guys the iPad I have. And how this works is I'm going to scroll through the comments. I can actually see them live on Facebook. And we'll just kind of work our way down and answer your guys' questions. All right.
Okay, what do we got?
All right. I did see some questions come through, which I'm pretty excited for. They were some pretty good questions too. So let's see here. People from all over the place. Oh, this is kind of a fun comment. So this is Laura. Yeah, so
Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura. Laura was the guide who gave us the information about Old Faithful Inn and bear hibernation. And she's saying that while she was filming the Old Faithful segment, she was getting eaten alive by mosquitoes. Yeah, so if you guys are unfamiliar with this area, we do get quite a few mosquitoes in
Which
June.
is weird to think about now when it's so cold.
Mm-hmm.
But think about that like standing water, right? When all of our snowpack melts, it's a lot of low-lying areas, and apparently one of them was nearby Laura when she was dedicated to filming that segment. So thank you, Laura, for your sacrifice.
Thank you, Laura. And I don't know about you, Bo, but
Yeah.
there's some places that I like avoid.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I never go there in the summer, even with people, even with guests, because
No.
the mosquitoes are so bad.
Even folks that are used to the boundary waters or like big time bug seasons have come to Western Wyoming at the wrong day in the wrong spot and said, "No, I can't do it. I can't do it."
Now, fortunately, for the most part, we don't have mosquitoes really in town or in most areas within the national park because it is pretty dry. But those ponds,
Deeper in some of those hills. Yeah.
some of those ponds are pretty bad. All right. Let's see what else we have.
Did you see someone from Paris, France joined us, which is so awesome to think about how many folks are joining us and have come on tour as well with such good questions.
Oh, here we go. I was looking for her comment. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's great to see you. And we get people from all over the world tuning into our broadcast, and we get people from all over the world on our tour.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think last week I had people from Denmark, so it's great to have our European friends join us.
Yeah. So glad. Okay. Oh, question.
Okay.
Ooh, long one.
So this is a very long question. I'm going to read it to you guys since the whole thing can't appear on the screen, and so I'm going to read it to you. Question. Here in Minnesota, we have been following a moose that was first spotted around Spirit Lake, Iowa, then traveled in a rather straight journey north through Minnesota. Now it has turned west and is around the North Dakota border. First, what is your take on what would have caused this moose to travel so far south? And second, what draws the moose north and west now in such a straight line? Thanks. This is a great question.
That's so far.
Yeah, that's crazy far.
Yeah.
When I saw this question come in, and when one of the videos was playing, I searched Spirit Lake, Iowa, and it is super far south.
Yeah. Very far.
And way out of the way for a moose to travel. And so
Interesting. Okay.
the first part of this question is, why would the moose travel so far south? So we see this happening occasionally with moose, oftentimes during the winter months. Bo and I are both from Colorado, which has a moose population.
It does.
And occasionally moose come out of those mountains and they will head, sometimes even through suburban areas, down a river corridor, and they'll just keep traveling. And so there are reports of Colorado moose showing up in strange places like Nebraska and South Dakota.
Yeah.
And then wasn't there a moose further south too, in the Navajo Nation area?
Yes. Yeah. So again, probably not the moose is not well suited for the big desert country, but if it can stay in a river corridor where it's finding food, water, shelter, and space, then it might travel. And I think moose are an animal that I talk about, that they do migrate, that they move and disperse more than people think. And I think especially here, people think of the elk migrating and the deer, but the moose will spread. Some of that collar data is they'll go a long way.
Totally. Yeah, so we have tons of information now about wildlife moving across the land. Why an animal would move such a far distance could be a number of reasons. We often see younger bull moose traveling to find mates or to find new territory. And this is something we see a lot with large animals. It happens with grizzlies. It happens a lot with wolves.
Oh, yeah.
And with moose, this bull moose could have been traveling southward to look for new territory or maybe to find a mate. And seems to be an occasional occurrence, that happens around these moose populations. Now, this moose probably headed south, ended up near Spirit Lake, and then realized that this area was either too warm or there wasn't great moose habitat down there to its liking, and that there weren't any available mates, and probably turned around to head back north to try and find more suitable habitat. It's kind of my take on what's going on.
Yeah. Amazing, though, to think about. Like, Tyler and I were looking this up, with the internet and GPS, but then for that moose to just think, I'm going to turn around. I know probably which way I'm going to go, and I'm going to go all the way back up. It looks like hundreds of miles to get back into an area, maybe better food, more possibility of mates up there. Crazy.
Totally. So now you're saying the moose is heading into North Dakota, which is really interesting to me. It kind of completes the story in my mind because North Dakota does have a residential moose population. They're kind of centered around the Turtle Mountain area, which is on the border of Canada and North Dakota. And Turtle Mountain is actually a provincial park on the Canadian side, which is pretty cool. And there is a pretty substantial moose population in that area. And so it's possible that this moose, in a way, is returning home and might set up shop in North Dakota and live out its life there. We'll have to see.
Yeah, and when you're thinking about where that park is in North Dakota, if you have that kind of, top square, top rectangle, think a little more to the right, a little more to the east side of things.
Yeah, more towards Minnesota than Montana.
Yeah.
But really great question.
Yeah.
And
cool occurrence.
We have really great wildlife populations currently in the U.S. that are recovering. And as wildlife populations recover, we often see this behavior where they disperse into new areas. Great question. Thanks so much.
And cool, while Tyler's looking at the next question, cool that we have that ability with the data, with that collar, right? That we can then get a little glimpse into one animal's life. But really, this could have been happening for decades or for generations, or there's other animals that are, kind of evading the public eye, but at least we have this little data point that then can help us inform what other conservation initiatives we need to do or connected green space. It's just cool to see that point of that animal's life as it goes through. Well, we're at the grocery store. You can that moose walked 40 miles today.
That's insane.
So cool.
Yeah, it's great that we can follow along and see where they go.
Yeah.
I just want to say thanks, Donald, for tuning in. Yeah, it's great to have you join us. I just wanted to give you a little shout out.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we have a question from Mark. What has the response been locally to the recent news of wolverines being put on the endangered species list? Both Bo and I have seen this news recently. And I'll be honest, I'm surprised that they weren't on the Endangered Species Act already. Considering that they have declined and how few of them there actually are. Of course, we have grizzlies on the Endangered Species Act, and wolves used to be on the Endangered Species Act. And we have a lot more grizzlies and wolves than wolverines.
But is there maybe a level of they're so hard to study and to track, and because they live in just such extreme environments, that with spotting scopes and all the rest of it, we can track some grizzlies, we can kind of keep up with wolves sometimes, but with the wolverines, it'd be so hard to get to know them, so it'd be harder to maybe get those final counts.
Absolutely.
So maybe all the more reason for the Endangered Species Act to kind of come into play.
And if you think about it, for a lot of these larger carnivores, for the annual Yellowstone Grizzly Survey, and for the annual Wolf Monitoring Survey, they're surveying these animals from helicopter or airplane.
Right.
And they're able to find, bears and wolves that are incredibly elusive. But the fact that they weren't finding really any wolverines, wolverines are such a hard animal to survey because there's so few of them, and they live in some of the most remote terrain. Areas where it's dangerous even to fly a plane or a helicopter to survey them.
Yeah, and I mean, relatively smaller than a wolf, smaller than a grizzly bear. So from a plane, if that wolverine hears that engine coming, maybe it is I'm gonna duck right here, and then it's okay, no visual count in that area. It's tough.
I'm imagining sitting on an airplane and flying over a forest trying to find a single wolverine in a huge area. It's just not practical to survey them. I do know that in other areas they survey wolverines with tracks. And there's certain
tracks and
algorithms.
Samples.
A great example is Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska.
Right.
They try to estimate the wolverine population based off the amount of tracks that they encounter. Which is a really interesting way to do it. Mathematically, I think that's fascinating. Trying to determine if you're crossing over multiple animals' tracks or a single individual. Which I think is fascinating.
But locally, I haven't heard much. I haven't heard
No?
kind of yay or nay.
Yeah.
I'm sure both of those are out there, but there hasn't been a lot of kind of local response to that change. I think again, it's just not an animal that we see. I've seen one ever.
You've seen one?
I've seen one.
Oh, I'm so jealous.
And that was at still like a great distance, right? And so it's yeah. Locally, we haven't heard much. But yeah, if y'all have wolverines in your home areas like the great state of Washington and other places, if you heard anything about kind of locally how it's changing for you all, love to hear about it.
Yeah, let us know in the comments what you guys think about it, or what your locals are saying about wolverines.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been a little overshadowed by the wolf reintroduction
Yeah.
in Colorado.
Yeah.
Which is why we probably aren't seeing a whole lot of like people talking about it on
Yeah.
like the news or social media.
Yeah.
Is kind of my prediction.
Yeah.
But great question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All right. Laura.
Laura yet again.
Hi, Laura. Laura's one of our guides, and she's asking, wait, was that a pronghorn jumping?
Yeah, it's a sneaky one.
It's a sneaky one, and it's really cool that Laura saw that. So I believe it's a photo, and it was in Taylor's video of a pronghorn jumping over a fence. And for you guys thinking, what's the big deal? Like, why is this
It looks like
unusual?
it can jump over fence.
Yeah, they
Looks
look
fine.
agile.
Yeah.
Pronghorn are not good at crossing fences at all. They usually crawl under them or through them. Yeah. And so it's really rare to actually see a pronghorn jump over a fence. And so I was also surprised when I saw that photo.
Yeah.
I think occasionally they do jump fences.
Yeah.
But it's rare, and they're not very good at it. And they risk injury when they do it, more so than when like a white-tailed deer or an elk jumps over a fence.
Yeah.
They're very nearsighted. They're really good at seeing things from far distances, but objects that are close to them, they can't see very well. Yeah. And that's because they've adapted to spot predators from a long distance.
Coming out. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so not real good at avoiding barriers like fences. I don't know what the situation is behind that particular photo, why that pronghorn would be jumping. I wasn't there, but maybe there was some sort of motivation to try to cause it to jump a fence when it normally wouldn't. Who knows? I think we can only speculate.
Yeah.
But that is a very rare occurrence.
Yeah. If anybody, while y'all are traveling, either in this ecosystem or otherwise with pronghorn, and you get a picture of a pronghorn jumping over a fence, please send it to us. We would love to see that.
We would love it. Yeah. And then we'll share it. With your permission on Wildlife Wednesday.
Yeah. Totally.
All right. Let's see what else. Ooh, here's Dawn. Good to see you again, Dawn. The question is, have you noticed any decline in smaller birds around Jackson as we have in parts of the Midwest? This is a great question. I've been here for 4 years, and in that time, I personally haven't noticed a decline, but I don't think I've been here long enough to really be able to observe that. What I can say, and Bo, feel free to add, is, and I think you went to this, right? The Wildlife Symposium.
No, I was working.
No.
I was working.
Okay, that's okay. I went to the annual Wildlife Symposium in Jackson, and during that conference, we had, I can't remember his name, but someone who is pretty high up in the wildlife community talk about the decline of songbirds in Idaho, which is pretty close to us. That's just over the pass on the other side of the Tetons. Yeah. And we do get an influx of birds from Idaho. For a great example is we are now getting sharp-tailed grouse in the valley, and it's believed that they came over from the Idaho side. And so typically what happens in Idaho is kind of mirrored in Grand Teton National Park. And so while I can't say for certain that we've had a songbird decline, it's very possible that we have. And to give everyone some context, songbirds, especially grassland birds, have been declining pretty significantly across the entire United States. Yeah. A really good example would be western meadowlarks. Yeah. And we're not really sure what's causing it. These birds live very complex lives. And a lot of these grassland birds are living in agricultural areas where they're being exposed to a lot of disturbance and a lot of pesticides. And that seems to be one of the biggest causes for declines and dickcissels and bobolinks and western meadowlarks. I will say that this summer I did not see any bobolinks on the National Elk Refuge, which was
Can't say
concerning
I
to
did
me.
Either. Yeah, now that I
Yeah.
think about it. Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
Usually I see them on the elk refuge in kind of the wetter areas, and they're pretty noticeable. We call them R2D2 birds because they fly up into the air and make R2D2 noises, which is pretty cool. And I didn't see any this summer. And so maybe that's some evidence for songbird declines, which is unfortunate. Songbirds are kind of a proxy for us to determine how well the environment is doing.
Yeah,
and so when things like songbirds and insects decline, it's really, really concerning.
Interesting.
But thank you, Don, for that question. I think we have time for one more question. I can't believe we're at the hour mark already, but we'll do one more question real quick.
Okay.
And then later on we'll go through the comments and give you guys a good answer if we did not get to your question.
Yeah.
All right. So our next question by Libby is, any news on Kelly Parcel in Grand Tetons? And so if you don't know what we're talking about, the Kelly Parcel is a mile by mile, or is it kilometer by kilometer? I think it's mile
by mile. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mile by mile parcel of state land, which is just adjacent to Grand Teton National Park. It's on the eastern side of the park.
It's kind of sandwiched between the park, this parcel, and then the U.S. Forest Service takes up right there. So it's this little piece that the Wyoming state owns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not super noticeable when you drive through that area.
You don't know.
You don't know it. You just think you're in the national park. Sometimes there's horses on it because they lease it out to grazers. But other than that, it's not very obvious. And recently, it's been proposed to be put up for auction.
Yeah.
To basically anyone. And someone who could afford that land would be either the national park, which I think a lot of the locals are hoping that the National Park Service will purchase it. Another person or another group who could purchase it would be developers.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of concern about this section of land being purchased by a developer and turned into housing and being sold for top dollar. Of course, those houses would have incredible views of the Tetons, but it would be a little disrupting to the national park and to the wildlife that move and migrate through that area.
And I think it's kind of it's a spot that now we can kind of look at as it just looks like a couple hills. There's a little drainage here or there. It's not the Grand Teton. It's not big and sassy like are those big peaks to the west, but the amount of wild animals that move through there, it's a critical little section that if we're, developed, be kind of a weird oddball of activity in a pathway.
Yeah.
So it is, a little concerning that the future of that, and we would hope that the park can figure out some deal.
Yeah.
But I believe as of now, the Land Commission has said to table that decision for a year.
Yeah.
So it kind of came to a head. They had a meeting, and then they said, for a year, we will delay this until all parties can kind of get their ducks in a row and maybe present proposals. I'm not totally sure what everyone will do in a year from now, but at least there's a little bit more thinking time to maybe, keep it in the conservation mindset.
Totally.
Yeah.
It sounded like they were moving forward to auction it off this year until there was a lot of local outcry and probably outcry from many different places.
Yeah.
People were very upset about this place being auctioned off and potentially being developed in the future. It's not something that most locals want, and it's not something that most people visiting Grand Teton want at all. We're definitely a community where the wild places out here come first.
Yeah.
And so they did table it for at least a year.
Yep.
And I think it was because of local outcry. I really hope that it becomes a part of Grand Teton National Park because it is one of my favorite areas within the national park, and we see a ton of animals through there, and it is incredibly important for migrating wildlife. It sits on the path of the pronghorn, and tons of elk and their predators move through there on their way to the elk refuge. And so, only time will tell what will happen.
Yeah.
Next year we'll know. And so feel free to come back if you guys are wanting an update
Yeah.
on that situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that parcel area is a little bit special to me. It may or may not be near where I asked my wife to marry me. Over on that side of the park. Special place.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people
Yeah.
have really personal ties to
Yeah.
this land, and so we don't want to see it being developed.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. She said yes, by the way. I didn't get dumped right there.
They're married now, so.
Anyway.
All right, thank you everyone for joining us for Wildlife Wednesday and for all your great questions. If we didn't get to your question during the live broadcast, we'll be sure to answer it in the comments below. And once again, we are live the first Wednesday of every single month, and so feel free to tune in next month, and we'll see you then. All right, thank you all.
See ya.